In last week's episode of Market Journal, we talked about managing corn rootworm resistance with Nebraska Extension entomologist Bob Wright. This week, we look at resistance in soybean cyst nematodes with Nebraska Extension educator John Wilson. As we've told you before, Nebraska's farmers can submit soil samples for SCN analysis for free thanks to the Nebraska Soybean Board. UNL received nearly 1,200 samples this year, a new record and 9% above last year. Nearly 37% of this year's samples were positive for SCN, and Sherman County was added to the list of those with a presence for SCN. When we talked with John near Takema Wednesday, he said resistance in soybean cyst nematodes can be difficult to detect and challenging to control.
Well, over time the majority of our resistant varieties have used the same source of resistance. The reason for that is it was the easiest one to breed in and maintain yields, which is kind of the underlying factor on all of this. But because we use the same source of resistance for so long that a certain percentage of the population will reproduce on any source of resistance. There is no source that eliminates all reproduction, but what we want to do is try and minimize it. Because so many varieties have used the same source of resistance, those that have survived from that particular source of resistance, the PI 88788, that they have continued to multiply in fields to where we have populations that increase at levels higher than what we would like to see on a resistant variety.
If you have a field that does have SCN in it, how do you know if that is resistant?
Okay, what we recommend is for producers, even if they've sampled the field, they know what level of SCN that they had in their field initially. If they're using resistant varieties in combination with rotation with non-host crops, for most of folks around here it'd be corn, that we encourage them to go back about 6 years later and resample those fields and see what the level is doing. Now, one thing that's important is if that initial sample was taken in the fall following soybeans, 6 years later, that it's important to go back in the fall following soybeans, so it's the same cropping conditions. But then when they look at the egg counts in the soil, if they stayed about level or started to decline, that's what we're hoping for, that it's doing an adequate job of managing the population. On the other hand, if 6 years later when they sample it, all of a sudden it's a half again or twice as high or more, we know that we have a problem and we have a population that's overcoming that particular source of resistance that they've been using.
So we've talked about this before, but once you have SCN, you pretty much have it forever, right?
Yeah,
is it once you have resistance, you also have that forever?
Well, yes, because what you're doing is you're selecting a fraction of the population that can overcome that source of resistance. It's no different than certain weeds becoming resistant to a particular herbicide, insects becoming resistant to a particular insecticide. We have nematodes that are becoming resistant or able to reproduce on a particular source of resistance. So what we recommend then is if a producer does have this situation, that there are several sources of resistance that are commercially available, and the seed companies are really making an effort to develop other resistant varieties utilizing these and still maintaining the yields. And so what a producer would need to do then would be look at scout out. It's going to be, right now it's a small percentage, less than 5%, probably less than 3% of the resistant varieties have one of these other sources of resistance. As time goes on and this problem expands, I look for there to be more resistant varieties with other sources of resistance. But find a good variety that has another source of resistance, use it in a year when you plant soybeans, and that way that it's a different selection pressure with a different genetic source of resistance.
Outside of crop rotation, are seed treatments effective in this case?
That we have not seen real good, consistent results with seed treatments, that we encourage producers to keep checking with them. The companies are looking at developing new sources of of seed treatments. The one thing that we need to make sure that folks understand is that if you use a seed treatment, it does not take the place of genetic resistance, but it's used in conjunction with it, because a lot of times it may reduce that the reproduction in that first generation in the spring. That SCN reproduces about every 25 to 30 days depending on soil temperatures. So with a seed treatment, we may eliminate that first generation, but there still will be SCN in the soil, and later on in the season we still need that genetic resistance in there from the resistant varieties to keep our populations in check.
John says if you haven't tested fields for soybean cyst nematodes before, it's a good idea to do so. And as we mentioned, it's free. You can visit your local Nebraska Extension office for a sample bag.